chosen soul. They didn't listen to your advice. You saw it coming. You warned them clearly. You explained the consequences of the path they were choosing, of the direction they were heading, of the decisions they were making. You could see what they couldn't. You could sense what they denied. You could know what they refused to acknowledge, to consider, to believe was possible. You told them. You showed them. You tried to help them understand, see, and recognize what was coming, what was inevitable, what was unavoidable if they continued on that path, in that direction, with those choices. But they didn't listen. They dismissed you. They ignored your warnings. They rejected your advice. And now, they're experiencing exactly what you said would happen. You saw the relationship wouldn't work. You could feel it, could sense it, could know it in your bones, in your gut, in your spirit, that this person, this connection, this relationship wasn't right, wasn't healthy, wasn't going to end well. You saw the red flags. You noticed the warning signs. You recognized the patterns that they completely missed, totally denied, actively ignored. You tried to tell them, to show them, to help them see what you saw, what was so obvious, so clear, so undeniable to you. But they didn't listen. They called you negative, jealous, and unsupportive. They said you didn't understand, didn't know them, didn't see what they saw. And now, months later, years later, after exactly what you predicted happened, they come back saying, "You were right. I should have listened. You saw the business decision was wrong. The investment was risky. The partnership was dangerous. You could see the flaws in the plan, the gaps in the strategy, the problems with the approach. Your experience, your intuition, your knowledge, all screaming, 'Don't do this. This won't work. This will fail.' You explained your concerns. You outlined the risks. You presented alternative approaches with logic, with evidence, with clear reasoning. But they didn't listen. They called you too cautious, too negative, too risk-averse. They said you didn't understand the opportunity, the potential, the vision. And now, after losing money, time, and resources exactly as you warned, they admit quietly, reluctantly, painfully, that you were right. You saw their health declining. You noticed changes, symptoms, and warning signs that they dismissed, minimized, and ignored. You encouraged doctor visits, lifestyle changes, and preventive action before a small problem became a big crisis, before a manageable issue became a serious condition, before an early warning became a late stage. You tried to convince them, to persuade them, to help them see what you saw, what was happening to their body, to their health, to their well-being. But they didn't listen. They said you worried too much, made too much of nothing, and overreacted to normal aging. And now, facing a diagnosis requiring treatment, they wish they'd listened when intervention was simpler. They wish they'd listened when correction was easier, when prevention was possible. You saw their child needed help, needed intervention, needed support that the parents weren't providing, weren't seeing, weren't willing to acknowledge. You saw the signs, the struggles, the suffering that the child was experiencing, was demonstrating, was communicating through behavior, through changes, through signals that the parents missed, denied, and minimized. You tried to gently, carefully, lovingly suggest professional help, therapeutic intervention, and additional support. But they didn't listen. They got defensive, got offended, and got angry that you'd suggest their child needed help, their parenting needed adjustment, their approach needed changing. And now, a crisis occurred. Intervention is required. They see what you saw all along. You saw the job wasn't right for them. The environment was toxic. The leadership was corrupt. The future was limited. You could see what they couldn't yet, wouldn't yet, didn't want to see. You saw that staying would damage them, would limit them, would hurt them more than leaving would. You encouraged a job search, a career change, a new direction while they still had leverage, options, and energy. Before the situation got worse, before the damage got deeper, before escape got harder. But they didn't listen. They said you didn't understand their situation, their obligations, their constraints. And now, after burnout, after betrayal, after exactly what you predicted, they're leaving anyway, damaged, depleted, diminished. You saw the pattern repeating, the same mistakes, the same choices, the same outcomes, different people, different situations, different circumstances, but the same essential pattern playing out again and again and again. You recognized it because you'd seen it before, in them, in others, in yourself. Before you broke it, you tried to show them the pattern, the repetition, the cycle they were stuck in, perpetuating and reinforcing through choices that seemed different but were fundamentally the same. But they didn't listen. They couldn't see the pattern you saw so clearly, so obviously. And now, after another identical outcome, they're starting to wonder if maybe you were onto something. You saw the financial trouble coming, the spending patterns, the debt accumulation, the budget imbalance that couldn't sustain, couldn't continue, couldn't last without eventual collapse, crisis, and consequence. You tried to warn them, to help them, to show them the math, the trajectory, the inevitable outcome if nothing changed, if spending continued, if denial persisted. You offered help, resources, and support to get on track, to create stability, to build security before the crisis hit. But they didn't listen. They said you worried too much, didn't understand their situation, didn't know what you were talking about. And now, the crisis arrived exactly on the schedule you predicted. You saw their addiction developing, the dependence forming, the problem escalating before they could see it, would admit it, or were willing to address it. You noticed increasing use, escalating behavior, and growing consequences that they dismissed, minimized, and rationalized as normal, as controlled, as not a problem. You tried to express concern, to offer help, to suggest intervention before casual use became a serious addiction, before a manageable issue became a life-threatening problem. But they didn't listen. They got angry, got defensive, and cut you off for suggesting they had a problem. And now, after the crisis, after the consequences, after hitting bottom, they admit you saw what they couldn't see, said what needed saying, and offered help they should have taken. You saw the friend wasn't trustworthy, the colleague wasn't loyal, the associate wasn't honest. You could sense something off, something wrong, something not quite right about this person they were trusting, confiding in, and partnering with. You noticed inconsistencies, red flags, and warning signs that didn't add up, didn't make sense, didn't feel right. You tried to express your concerns. You expressed your reservations gently, carefully, without accusations, just observations, just questions, just concerns. But they didn't listen. They said you were judging, were suspicious, were negative about someone who'd been nothing but good to them. And now, after betrayal, after deception, after exactly what you sensed happened, they understand your concerns were valid. You saw they needed boundaries with that person, with that situation, with that commitment that was draining them, using them, depleting them of energy, of time, of resources, without reciprocity, without appreciation, without respect. You could see the imbalance, the extraction, the depletion happening to them that they couldn't see, wouldn't admit, and felt guilty even considering addressing. You encouraged boundaries, limits, and the protection of their resources, energy, and well-being, but they didn't listen. They said you didn't understand their obligations, their responsibilities, their commitments, and now, completely depleted, totally exhausted, and finally burned out. They're setting boundaries they should have set long ago. You saw the truth they were avoiding, the reality they were denying, the situation they were ignoring that wouldn't go away through denial, through avoidance, through ignoring, but would only get worse, get bigger, get more problematic the longer they waited. The more they denied, the harder they avoided. You tried to help them face it, deal with it, address it while it was still manageable, while still addressable, while still solvable, but they didn't listen. They preferred comfortable denial to uncomfortable truth. They preferred easy avoidance to difficult confrontation. And now, the problem grew too big to ignore, too serious to deny, too urgent to avoid, requiring exactly the difficult confrontation they could have had earlier when stakes were lower. You saw their potential being wasted, their gifts being buried, their calling being ignored. You could see what they were capable of, what they could become, what they were meant for that was so much greater than what they were settling for. You saw they were accepting and resigning themselves to less. You tried to encourage them, to inspire them, to challenge them to pursue their potential, to develop their gifts, to follow their calling, but they didn't listen. They said you didn't understand their limitations, their circumstances, their reality that made pursuing potential impossible. And now, years later, decades later, they look back with regret, wondering what if they'd listened when you saw, believed, and encouraged what they couldn't see in themselves. You saw the timing was wrong, too soon, too late, too rushed for what they were planning, pursuing, pushing to happen. You could sense the misalignment between their timing and the right timing, between their schedule and the divine schedule, between their rush and the proper pace. You encouraged patience, waiting, and better timing, but they didn't listen. They couldn't wait, wouldn't delay, and had to do it now, on their timeline, their schedule, their plan. And now, after forcing the wrong timing, they suffer the consequences. After pushing premature action, after rushing what needed patience, they're dealing with the consequences of wrong timing that patience could have prevented. You saw they were being used, being manipulated, being taken advantage of by a person, by a system, by a situation that saw their goodness, their generosity, their kindness as weakness, as an opportunity, as a resource to exploit. You could see the exploitation, the manipulation, the using that they couldn't see, wouldn't believe, didn't want to acknowledge. You tried to show them, to help them, to protect them from being used, exploited, and taken advantage of. But they didn't listen. They said you were cynical, were suspicious, were seeing problems that weren't there. And now, after being used, exploited, and discarded, they see what you saw all along. You saw their priorities were misaligned. What they were pursuing, what they were prioritizing, what they were sacrificing for wasn't actually what mattered most. What would truly satisfy? What would actually fulfill? You could see it clearly. You could see they were climbing the wrong ladder, chasing the wrong goal, pursuing the wrong priority that would leave them empty, unsatisfied, and regretful. Even if successfully achieved, you tried to help them reconsider, realign, reprioritize before investing more years, more energy, more life in the wrong direction. But they didn't listen. They couldn't hear, wouldn't consider that maybe, just maybe, they were pursuing the wrong thing. And now, having achieved what they pursued, they feel exactly the emptiness you predicted. You saw the opportunity they were missing, the door opening, the moment arriving, the chance presenting that wouldn't stay open forever, that wouldn't wait indefinitely, that wouldn't keep presenting repeatedly. You encouraged action, movement, and decision while the window was open, while the opportunity was available, while the moment was present. But they didn't listen. They hesitated, delayed, and waited for perfect certainty, complete clarity, total guarantee. And now, the opportunity has passed. The door has closed. The moment is gone. They see what you saw, what they missed, what won't come again. You saw they needed help, professional help, therapeutic intervention, expert assistance for an issue, for a problem, for a situation that was beyond their capacity, beyond their resources, beyond their ability to handle alone, to solve independently, to fix by themselves. You suggested counseling, therapy, and professional support without shame, without judgment, just a practical recognition of the need for help. But they didn't listen. They saw seeking help as a weakness, as a failure, as an admission of inadequacy. And now, after the problem escalated, after the situation deteriorated, after the crisis arrived, they're getting the help you suggested months ago, years ago, when it could have prevented this. Chosen soul, they didn't listen to your advice, and it hurts. Not because you needed to be right, but because you cared. Not because you wanted an "I told you so" moment, but because you wanted to help. Not because you needed validation, but because you genuinely saw. You genuinely saw and wanted to prevent the pain, the loss, the suffering that you knew was coming if they continued on that path, in that direction, with those choices. You saw, you warned, you advised from a place of love, of care, of genuine concern for their well-being, their success, their happiness, and they didn't listen. Not because your advice was wrong, but because the timing was off, because they weren't ready, because they needed to learn through experience what you tried to teach through wisdom. Some lessons can only be learned through living, through experiencing, through suffering the consequences of not listening to those who see further, know deeper, and understand better than we do in the moment. Your advice was right. Your warnings were accurate. Your concerns were valid. Time proved it. Experience confirmed it. Reality validated it. All that you said, all that you saw, all that you knew was coming, came exactly as you predicted. They didn't listen. But you were right. Your seeing was accurate. Your knowing was true. Your advice was sound. And now, they know. Now they see. Now they understand what you saw before they could. What you knew before they would. What you warned before they listened. They didn't listen. Your advice was right. And that's what matters. Not being vindicated, but being someone who sees, knows, and cares enough to warn, even when warnings aren't heard. You saw the move was wrong, the location wasn't right, the timing was off for that geographic change, that relocation, that displacement from everything familiar, everything stable, everything supportive. You could sense something wasn't aligned about this move, this timing, this decision. You expressed your concerns, your hesitations, your feelings that maybe this wasn't the right time, right place, right decision. But they didn't listen. They said you were being negative, unsupportive, and resistant to their growth, adventure, and new chapter. And now, months later, struggling, isolated, and regretting the move, they see what you saw about timing, about fit, about alignment. You saw they needed rest, needed a break, needed a pause. You saw they needed a pause from the relentless pace, the constant pressure, the endless demands that were depleting them, exhausting them, burning them out. You could see the signs of an impending collapse, breakdown, and crisis if they didn't stop, didn't rest, didn't recover. You encouraged a vacation, a sabbatical, time off before burnout became complete, before exhaustion became collapse, before depletion became a crisis. But they didn't listen. They couldn't stop, wouldn't pause. They had too much to do, too many depending on them, too much at stake. And now, forced to stop by their body, by breakdown, by crisis, they're taking the rest you advised months ago, when it could have been preventive, not reactive. You saw the investment was shady, the return promised was unrealistic, the opportunity presented was too good to be true. You could smell the scam, the fraud, the deception from a mile away. Your experience, your knowledge, your discernment, all warning. Don't invest, don't trust, don't believe these promises, these returns, these guarantees. You explained your concerns, you outlined the red flags, you researched the warnings, the complaints, the evidence of fraud, but they didn't listen. They saw only opportunity, potential, and returns, not risk, not fraud, not a scam. And now, the money is gone, the investment is lost, exactly as you warned. They wish they'd listened to your experience, your wisdom, your discernment. You saw their anger was destroying them, their bitterness was poisoning them, their resentment was consuming them from the inside. Not the person, not the situation, not the injustice they were angry about, bitter toward, or resentful of, but them, their peace, their joy, their freedom. You encouraged forgiveness, release, and letting go, not for the other person's sake, but for their own liberation, for their own healing, for their own freedom. But they didn't listen. They held on to anger, nursed bitterness, and fed resentment until it consumed everything good in their life. And now, finally ready to release it, they see what you saw about the cost of holding on. You saw the comparison was killing them, the social media was poisoning them, the constant measuring was destroying them, their peace, their contentment, their joy in their own journey, their own progress, their own life. You could see how comparison robbed joy, how measuring created misery, how social media generated inadequacy. You encouraged unplugging, unfollowing, disconnecting from the constant comparison, measurement, and evaluation against others. But they didn't listen. They couldn't stop, wouldn't unplug from the constant feed of everyone else's highlight reels. And now, depressed, anxious, and inadequate, they're finally unplugging like you suggested long ago. You saw the forgiveness they needed to give, not to others, but to themselves, for mistakes, for failures, for choices that they couldn't stop punishing themselves for, couldn't stop beating themselves up about, couldn't stop regretting, reliving, rehashing. You could see how self-punishment wasn't helping, how self-flagellation wasn't healing, how self-condemnation wasn't changing anything. It was just creating more suffering on top of the original pain. You encouraged self-forgiveness, self-compassion, and self-grace for being human, for making mistakes, for not being perfect. But they didn't listen. They couldn't forgive, couldn't release, couldn't let themselves off the hook, until finally, exhausted from self-punishment, they're ready for the self-forgiveness you encouraged years ago. You saw their perfectionism was paralyzing, their standards were impossible, their expectations were crushing them, their creativity, their productivity, their progress. You could see how perfectionism prevented starting, how impossible standards prevented finishing, how crushing expectations prevented trying anything that couldn't be done perfectly. You encouraged progress over perfection, done over perfect, action over paralysis. But they didn't listen. They couldn't lower their standards, couldn't accept imperfection, couldn't embrace good enough. And now, having produced nothing, completed nothing, started nothing, because nothing could be perfect, they're finally embracing progress over perfection. You saw the people-pleasing was destroying them, the constant yes was depleting them, the inability to say no was consuming them, their time, their energy, their life, serving everyone else's priorities while their own dreams, goals, and needs went completely unattended, unfulfilled, and ignored. You encouraged boundaries, a selective yes, an empowered no to protect their time, their energy, their capacity for what actually matters to them. But they didn't listen. They couldn't say no, couldn't set boundaries, couldn't disappoint others by choosing themselves. And now, completely depleted, totally exhausted, having nothing left for themselves, they're learning to say no like you encouraged long ago. Chosen soul, they didn't listen to your advice, your warnings, your wisdom, and you're left with difficult feelings about that. Sadness that they suffered what could have been prevented. Frustration that they wouldn't listen when you clearly saw, clearly warned, clearly advised. You feel grief for what they lost, what they could have avoided, what might have been different if only they'd listened. These feelings are valid, are real, are legitimate. You cared, you warned, You tried to help, and they didn't listen. That hurts. That's frustrating. That's sad. Feel those feelings. Honor those emotions. Acknowledge those responses to loving someone enough to warn them and having your warnings ignored. But also know this: your advice was right. Your seeing was accurate. Your knowing was true. Time proved it. Reality confirmed it. Experience validated it. You were right. Your discernment works. Your intuition functions. Your wisdom sees what others miss, what others deny, what others don't want to acknowledge. Keep seeing, keep knowing, keep warning those you love, even when they don't listen, even when they won't hear, even when they refuse to believe, because eventually, they will see, eventually, they will know, eventually, they will understand what you saw before they could, what you knew before they would, what you warned before they listened. They didn't listen, but you were right, and that's confirmation of your gifts, your sight, your knowing. Keep using them, keep trusting them, keep honoring them, even when others don't listen yet. You saw the education path was wrong, the degree they were pursuing, the school they were attending, the career they were training for wasn't aligned with who they actually are, what they actually love, what they're actually meant for. You could see the mismatch between their chosen path and true calling, between their selected field and genuine passion, between their pursued degree and actual purpose. You suggested reconsidering, exploring alternatives, and following passion instead of prestige, practicality, and parental expectations. But they didn't listen. They stayed the course, completed the degree, and started the career. And now, years later, miserable and unfulfilled, they're realizing you were right about the misalignment. You saw their communication style was destroying their relationships. Their tone was harsh. Their words were cutting. Their approach was alienating people they cared about, loved, and wanted connection with. You could see how their delivery overshadowed their message, how their harshness prevented their love from landing, how their approach created walls instead of bridges. You gently, carefully, lovingly suggested a different approach, a softer tone, kinder words. But they didn't listen. They said you were too sensitive, too soft, and didn't understand that their directness was honest. And now, with relationships damaged, connections broken, and people distant, they're learning the communication you tried to teach. You saw their pride was isolating them. Their ego was alienating them. Their arrogance was separating them from people, from opportunities, from blessings that required humility, openness, and receptivity to receive. You could see how pride prevented asking for help, how ego rejected feedback, how arrogance dismissed wisdom from others who could help them, guide them, and support them. You encouraged humility, openness, and a willingness to learn, to receive, to be taught. But they didn't listen. They defended their pride, protected their ego, and maintained their arrogance until the isolation became so painful they finally humbled themselves like you suggested long ago. You saw the excuse-making was preventing their growth, their progress, their transformation. Every reason why they couldn't, every explanation why they shouldn't, every justification why they wouldn't take action, make changes, or move forward toward what they said they wanted, what they claimed they desired, what they professed they needed. You called out the excuses, challenged the reasons, and questioned the justifications, not harshly, but lovingly, to help them see what was actually stopping them. But they didn't listen. They got defensive, got offended, and insisted their excuses were valid, their reasons were real, their justifications were legitimate, until finally, tired of their own excuses, they're taking the action you encouraged years ago. You saw the victimhood was trapping them, the blame was paralyzing them, the helplessness was imprisoning them. They were stuck in a story where they had no power, no agency, no ability to change anything about their situation, circumstances, or life, because everything was someone else's fault, someone else's responsibility, someone else's problem to fix. You encouraged ownership, responsibility, and agency over their life, choices, and outcomes, not to blame themselves, but to empower themselves to create change. But they didn't listen. They preferred being a comfortable victim to an uncomfortable agent, until the victim position became so unbearable. They finally claimed the agency you offered long ago. You saw the lifestyle was unsustainable, the pace was unmanageable, the commitments were unrealistic for the long term, for health, for well-being. You could see the math didn't work. The schedule couldn't sustain them. The obligations couldn't continue without an eventual breakdown, collapse, and crisis. You encouraged simplification, reduction, and a sustainable pace before a crash became inevitable. Before a breakdown became unavoidable, before a crisis became imminent. But they didn't listen. They said you didn't understand their capacity, their drive, their commitment. And now, after the crash, after the breakdown, after the crisis, they're creating the sustainable lifestyle you advised before the collapse. Chosen soul, they didn't listen. And that's not a reflection on your wisdom, your insight, or your guidance. That's a reflection on their readiness, their timing, their process. Some people need to learn through experience what they can't learn through advice. They need to discover through suffering what they won't discover through wisdom. They need to understand through consequences what they don't understand through warnings. This isn't a failure of your advice. This is the reality of human learning, growth, and development that sometimes requires hard lessons, painful experiences, and difficult consequences to catalyze change, transformation, and evolution. Your advice was right. Your warnings were accurate. Your wisdom was sound. Time proved it. Experience confirmed it. Reality validated it. Every single thing you said, every warning you gave, every concern you expressed came true, manifested, and happened exactly as you predicted. This confirms your discernment, your intuition. Your knowing is real, is accurate, is trustworthy. Don't doubt your seeing because others didn't listen. Don't question your knowing because others weren't ready. Don't dismiss your wisdom because others needed to learn differently. Your gifts are real. Your sight is accurate. Your knowing is true. Keep seeing. Keep warning. Keep advising those you love, even when they don't listen. Because your role is to see, to warn, to advise. Their role is to listen or not, to heed or not, to learn the easy way or the hard way. You can't control their choices, their timing, their readiness. You can only offer your wisdom, your insight, your guidance, which you did faithfully, lovingly, and accurately. They didn't listen, but you were right, And being right when no one listens is both painful and powerful. Painful because you care, powerful because it confirms your gifts, your sight, and your knowing are real. Keep trusting them, keep using them, keep honoring them. They didn't listen to your advice, but time did, and time proved you right.